In the week that the UN announces that Finland is officially the world's happiest country, we salute our Finnish listeners and wonder if their happiness is down to the amount of great crime fiction they produce. We can only assume it is. This is episode 8.
This is Partners in Crime with Adam Croft and Robert Dawes.
Here's that time of the week again, Bob. Another episode.
Yet another one. Episode 8.
Yes, time seems to be flying, but this week I've actually managed to do some reading.
What?
I know. I've, off the back of reading Gillian McAllister's book, Anything You Do Say, which I mentioned a few episodes ago.
Yeah.
Have you read that yet? Or
no, I haven't had the pleasure.
Right, well, I've been reading her first book. They are standalone, so you can read them in any order, called Anything But the Truth, or Everything But the Truth. I can't remember, but good. It's quite good anyway.
Good title.
Yes, whichever title it is very good. It's quite different from the second one, from Anything You Do Say, but still very, very gripping. It's hard to describe. It's not really a psychological thriller. It is in some ways. It's a kind of a slow burning drama that very much revolves around a historical crime. I can't say anything else without giving the plot away, but
well, historical crime is very much the subject this week, is it not?
It is, yes.
I've got a couple of things to my weekly recommendation. I think I mentioned on a podcast recently that I didn't spend much time looking at true crime series or books, but I'm going to blow that particular theory out of the water. I caught an episode of Channel 4's excellent series 24 Hours in Police Custody this week, and it was a very gruelling and emotional, deeply tragic story about a dead body discovered buried in a back garden in Luton. The police had a tip-off about the possibility of a body being there. The lady went missing in 2003 and was not found, and the tip-off led to a body, skeleton being found in this back garden, and of course it called upon the services and expertise of a forensic archaeologist who came, found the bones, and in fact dug up an entire skeleton of this poor woman. It's a very moving episode. If anyone has not seen 24 Hours in Police Custody, it's a very finely made documentary, and it takes you through every level of the investigation, from the tip-off to the police making their inquiries, of course, and eventually moving in on the site where they suspect this body has been buried. And it's very moving. It's a tragedy, and it's very affecting as well. So that's one recommendation. I haven't seen any other episodes, but I will catch up on them.
They are fantastic. I've been watching it for a few series now, mainly because it is set in our local area. We are within Bedfordshire Police's jurisdiction as we sit here in the glorious Croft Studios, and so it's particularly fascinating for me and for us because it's our local area. We know these areas where these crimes are being investigated, and it gives you such a good look into how crimes are really investigated.
Yes.
And the fact that it's mostly back office stuff that goes on. It's, you don't have DCIs going out and interviewing people and roughing up the
hard grind.
Yeah.
Not the glamour and pouting that one assumes.
No, not the bits that we
the more entertainment industry's depiction of some coppers,
or the bits that we ourselves are guilty of making up for entertainment's purposes. But to see how it's really done is fascinating, and I can imagine if you're, even if you don't live in the UK, being able to catch that would be a fascinating look into how.
Well, I'm sure it is available. I hope it's available worldwide. Anyway, it's Channel 4 in the UK, and a great documentary series. So that's a big recommendation.
24 Hours in Police Custody.
Which leads me to my second recommendation, which again is true crime. Now, our wonderful guest the other week, Peter James. His crime novels, the Roy Grace series, are made all the more compelling by his in-depth research into the work of Brighton and Hove police forces. He sets them in a world every bit as gritty as the real thing, and this comes down, as he mentioned, to rigorous research. Now, he and Graham Bartlett, a long-serving detective and commander of Brighton Police for 4 years, have written a gripping account of the city's most challenging modern cases, many of which Graham Bartlett helped solve. The book is called Death Comes Knocking. It is an extraordinary read, and it takes the reader on a vivid journey from crime scenes and incident rooms to the morgue. Along the way, we are introduced to some of the real-life detectives who inspired Peter James's characters. We read about horrific murders, one of a dodgy nightclub owner and his family. We see how the police track down the antique trade's most notorious knocker boys, nailed an audacious ring of forgers, and hunted a cold-blooded killer who executed a surfer. It's an extraordinary book, incredibly well researched. I know Graham. In fact, I think we're on the same panel at a festival in a few months' time. He's a mine of information and is one of Peter James's obviously main go-to people for research on police techniques and the execution of their job. But it does skillfully evoke the dangers of policing a city. I mean, Brighton, I think, was once described as Britain's crime capital. And both authors, I mean, Graham Bartlett has written this with Peter James, share their insights into the personal toll the job can take, and the dedication and professionalism of those who, well, risk their lives to keep us all safe. So the book is called Death Comes Knocking, Policing Roy Grace's Brighton, and for anyone interested in true crime and in particular how Peter goes about his research. In fact, I've just got a letter from an email from Peter showing him in Dubai, going out with the Dubai police force in one of their patrol cars, which I think happens to be a Maserati or a Porsche. I mean, we've come a long way from the old Panda cars of said cars, have we not?
They say that we've still got them here in Bedfordshire.
Of course,
we've only just got light bulbs, though.
Yes,
so.
we don't like change.
No.
We like things traditional. So there we are. Death Comes Knocking, Graham Bartlett and Peter James. Get a copy if you can, or download accordingly.
I already got my copy. I saw you brought that along the other day when we interviewed Peter, and I saw that and I thought, oh, that looks good. Oh yeah, oh, yours is signed. Oh, what's that say? To Bob.
To Bob. I hope you enjoy the read. Who the hell are you? All best wishes, Graham Bartlett. So yes.
I've also been reading an old crime novel from 1940. I do like to see us kind of dip
vintage.
back and see how far we come in those times. It's Raymond Postgate's Verdict of 12. Are you familiar with it?
No, not at all.
It appears to be a courtroom drama, from what I can discover after having sort of waded through the original first 30% of the book, which appears to all be backstory of the jurors.
I'm not getting a very positive response to your read on this.
It is. It's very... the layout and the structure of it is innovative.
Right.
I will say. I'm sure there is a very good reason behind it, and I've heard very good things about it as well. It's one of those kind of slightly forgotten novels. Raymond Postgate, I think, was it a food and drink critic?
Was he really?
I've
never heard of him.
I believe he was kind of sneered upon by the establishment critics because he was seen as not being very good, which might have had something to do with his kind of communist leanings. I think the establishment kind of trying to edge him out a bit. But he wrote a couple of very good crime and mystery novels, apparently. So I'm reading that. That's very interesting. Verdict of 12 by Raymond Postgate.
Well.
And I've also got a new addiction.
Oh, I.
Another one, which
I forgot. Well, let me get my list out here.
Yeah.
It goes over 3 pages.
I've discovered a TV channel called Talking Pictures TV.
Now.
Yes, you know it.
I have. Peter Purvis. I was doing a recording with the wonderful Peter Purvis.
Name dropping again.
No, not at all. But he would be doing a Doctor Who, and he was waxing lyrical about this television station. Said it has become an addiction for him.
Yeah.
So sorry to interrupt. Carry on.
Basically, it specialises in showing old British B movies and TV series that have been long forgotten and consigned to the well, not even to the archives. Much of them, I think, a lot of the tapes have been found in people's lofts and kind of reconstituted and. I mean,
like the old Edgar Wallace.
Yes, Edgar Wallace mysteries are on Talking Pictures TV.
God,
yes.
Is that the one with the head used to spin?
Yes,
and the music
and a fantastic series from the same producers and from I can't remember the name of the mystery writer. I'll find out in a minute, and I'll tell you how I'm going to find out. But he also did a series a few years before that called Scotland Yard, which was shown in cinemas before the main feature. and was later shown on TV, which is... They're half-hour crime dramas
Yes.
in the early 1950s, late 50s. And they are all based on true crimes, but they are dramatised and all the names are changed to kind of make sure the same detectives are in each episode. And they're about half an hour long, and it's fascinating to look at how kind of rudimentary a lot of these programmes are when they were put together in those days, but also quite fascinating, and they're just really interesting to watch.
And scenes that lasted more than 40 seconds.
Yes.
You know, I mean, that's interesting. So, yes, so we'll look out for Croft of the Yard.
Well, in fact, I have here next to me an Amazon package which turned up this morning. Other retailers
not
are
even
available.
open. He's about to... That wonderful thing where you rip.
I'm going to do a live unveiling on the show because I know what's in this because I've only ordered one
What
thing.
a satisfying sound.
I got so addicted to this. I bought here, there we go, the DVD box set of Scotland Yard, the complete series.
Good Lord.
There it is. Edgar Lustgarten.
Edgar Lustgarten, now
Yes.
you're talking.
Now, I've forgotten his name. I knew it would probably be somewhere on this DVD, which is what I was referring to a moment ago. Yeah, it says
So
here-
these were before the sort of Leslie, well, I mean, the Saint, Leslie Charteris, and all that. They began, I think, in the late 50s. I mean, I don't know. I seem to think the Saint was done on radio before Roger Moore.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is
immortalised it on television.
It started in 1953. It's got to be one of the first TV regular crime series, hasn't it? It's got to be. It says here, behind the scenes of the world's most exciting police HQ. Scotland Yard was perhaps the best-known series to emerge from Anglo Amalgamated's output of crime drama. Shot as cinema support features at the company's Merton Park studios in South Wimbledon, these half-hour thrillers, based on real-life cases from the vaults of London's Metropolitan Police headquarters, were a successful regular feature in cinemas over nearly a decade from the early 1950s onwards.
My God, Merton Park.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's
I think the studio's still there. It's not far from where they used to shoot The Bill. And various other things.
there are 39 of these. Well, they call them short films.
Was it a sort of the same detective every week and the same team working on the cases?
Mostly Inspector Duggan, who was played by Russell Napier, but not always. Well, I mean, he was always played by Russell Napier, but he wasn't always the inspector. There's 39 films, as they call them, even though they're about 28 minutes long. And there's lots of actors who had some of their original performances there. Arthur Lowe had one of his early TV appearances there. John LeMessurier as well. Harry H. Corbett, Peter Bowles, who I saw last week in The Exorcist in London as well. So there's lots of names who appeared in this.
And kick-started their careers. I mean, the Bill used to do that in a way. I mean, that was like a repertory company of British actors. Very often you'd see the same actor turning up, sort of over several years in different parts.
The void now filled by Holby City.
Well, yes. I mean, so that's what's the name of the television series channel
The
again?
station, Talking Pictures TV. I think it's only available in the UK, unfortunately. I think, but it's on Freeview, it's on Sky, Virgin, it's on all of the different, and it's a local company that runs it.
That sounds like a wonderful way to while away a lost weekend.
Oh, you can lose weeks watching that channel. It's absolutely fascinating.
Okay, well, if I can't contact you, I'll know what you'll be doing.
I'll be in the 1940s somewhere. But you mentioned 24 hours in police custody. Just to go back and make a really, really awkward segue, you mentioned the appearance of a forensic archaeologist.
Yes.
In the episode that you're watching, which segues nicely into this week's guest. See how seamless that was? Effortless. This week's guest is Elly Griffiths, the author of the best-selling books featuring forensic archaeologist Ruth Galloway. But we'll get onto that in a little bit, which is why that segue was completely pointless. In the meantime, if you want to get in touch with us, by the way, please do subscribe to the Partners in Crime podcast. It's completely free, always will be, always has been, and it ensures that you will never, ever miss an episode. You can subscribe through iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, however you'd like to. It just means that the latest episodes are always sent directly to your device as soon as they go live, so you don't need to miss an episode. If you want to get in contact with us for whatever reason, to suggest a future guest or something we might like to talk about, you can catch us on Twitter at CrimeFicPodcast, on Facebook, Partners in Crime Podcast, or via our website, partnersincrime.online, or you can email us hello@partnersincrime.online. Now, the podcast is very kindly sponsored by Kobo, who have over 5 million titles available in their online bookshop. You don't need a special e-reader or a device in order to read the books, although you can buy one if you'd like to. You can use the free Kobo app on your mobile phone or your tablet or whatever it is you're listening to us on at the moment. And Kobo are very kindly offering listeners to Partners in Crime 90% off of their first ebook at Kobo. A huge discount. Just go to kobo.com, select the book you'd like to buy, and enter the promo code CRIME at the checkout.
Elly Griffiths will be known to many of you as the award-winning best-selling crime novelist of the hugely popular Ruth Galloway series, and more recently her 1950s Brighton set Stevens and Mephisto Murder Mysteries. I've been a fan for many years, and so it's with great delight we welcome Elly to the show today. Hello, Elly.
Hello.
How are you?
Really well, thank you. Yeah, very nice and sunny here in Brighton today. So
that's nice to know. That's
all right for some.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, we are under dark, cloudy skies where we are. But I'm very happy that the sun is shining in Brighton. That is traditionally how one likes to think of Brighton. So that's great news. Now, I have got a first question here for you, if I may ask. Can you explain the influence of the novelist Domenica De Rosa on your writing?
Well, she's a great novelist, actually, Domenica De Rosa, much underrated. Of course, as you know, Bob, Domenica De Rosa is me. It's my real name, even though it sounds completely made up. It is my real name. It's Italian. My dad was Italian, and actually, it means Domenica De Rosa means Sunday of the Rose, which is actually a Sunday in Lent. It might even be this Sunday.
Good
Anyhow.
grief. Well, look,
I know.
The 11th. Well, that's worth looking at.
I think it might be the 11th. I think it's the day when the priest wears sort of pink robes in a rather camp and beautiful way.
Oh. I'll keep an eye out for camp priests this Sunday.
Yes, you do that.
But that's a very romantic name, isn't it? I mean,
it is. It is, and you know, I think as Domenica De Rosa, I did write 4 books. You know, basically sort of women's fiction, romantic, with a bit of sort of historical subject matter as well. So I did write as Domenica De Rosa, and I think maybe even having such a romantic name kind of influenced my decision to be a writer. I don't know.
Wow.
But then when I wrote The Crossing Places, which is the first Ruth book, my agent said to me, she said, this is crime. You need a crime name.
Oh. And
that was Elly Griffiths.
Where did you get the crime name from?
Well, it was my grandmother's name, and I found out afterwards that lots of writers, I think, choose their grandparents' names. And my grandmother was Elly Griffiths on my mother's side, on the sort of, she was Welsh, actually, on the Welsh side of the family. And I remember I wanted to be Elly Griffiths, and somehow it became Elly. And I only asked my editor, Jane, recently, like a couple of months ago, why did I become Elly? And she said, I don't know, it just looked a bit tidier.
Well, it's a great name. So God bless your grandma, and of course, you know, it's on everyone's lips at the moment. I mean, and has been for several years now with the huge success of the Galloway novels. So my next question is, old bones are at the centre of your Ruth Galloway novels. What drew you to them as a specialist subject?
Oh, that's a very good question. Well, really, it was because my husband, Andy, had a change of career. When I met him, he had a proper job. He worked in the city. He was a lawyer working in the city. And I always remember, like, the first time I met him was in a kind of city wine bar, and he was there with his pinstripe suit on, and he said, you know, with all his other lawyer friends, he said, well, you know, I didn't want to be a lawyer. I wanted to be an archaeologist. And I thought, that's so sweet. He's not like the others. So we got married, obviously not immediately, but a little while afterwards. But then, you know, after we'd been married a little while and we had 2 children, he said, remember that that thing about being an archaeologist? I want to go back and do it. So he did. He went back to university and became an archaeologist. So that really sparked my interest in the work of a forensic archaeologist, particularly sort of digging up old bones. And it was a chance remark of Andy's, really, that inspired the first book, which is The Crossing Places. And we were walking across kind of Titchwell Marsh in North Norfolk, and he just made a comment about prehistoric people thinking marshland sacred because it's not land or sea. They thought of it as between life and death, neither land nor sea, neither life and death. and that's what gave me the whole idea for that book. So I have to thank his change of career, really.
I mean, I was speaking to Bob before we started recording about this, and it's a fascinating story in its own right that he wanted to give up being a city lawyer and become an archaeologist. That's a lovely kind of romantic story as it is. But not only has he kind of spawned his own new career, but he's also indirectly spawned yours as well. Yeah,
no, it has turned out to be a really good move for both of us, I think. Yeah, and he's done really well. He's the archaeology curator at Brighton Museum now. So
wow.
He's been very successful in that career too. And yeah, loads of ideas. It's given me loads of book ideas. So yes, I should have been, after all, how many murders can you get out of being a city lawyer? Not probably a few. But for me, archaeology has been much richer seam to mine.
Well, you've done it quite brilliantly. I mean, when I first read The Crossing Places, I was totally drawn into this extraordinary world.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, the atmosphere of the novel, and this, as you say, this extraordinary marshland between land and sea, this sacred area, and the characters that you brought into the novel to actually act as a conduit into this mysterious world of past spirits and ancient ways. I mean, Cathbad is obviously an extraordinary character, and the spirit world. Who did you research, or how did you research to develop such a wonderful depiction of this mystical man?
Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad you like Cathbad.
Oh, I love Cathbad.
I'm so pleased. He was one of those characters that in the first book, in The Crossing Places, he's really just, another suspect, really. But now
you do worry. I can.
Yeah, and I've just finished book 10, The Dark Angel, and of course he's really developed and he's one of the main characters now. I'm not sure quite where he came from, but one of the things that has always interested me about archaeology is it's a very strange and interesting discipline, because you get people who are very, very, interested in geophysics and all the technical stuff, a bit like Ruth's boss, Phil. But on the other end of the scale, you do get people who are very spiritual. And, I know an archaeologist who always starts his dig at sunrise and always ends it at sunset. And he sort of thanks the nature spirits. And so you do get people. And the first book, The Crossing Places, was sort of based on a real Bronze Age henge that was found in North Norfolk. And when archaeologists tried to move the timbers away, local druids protested. And I remember reading about that thinking, local druids? Really? Are there local druids? But there were local druids in Norfolk who protested. So that's really where Cathbad came from.
I mean, Norfolk in and of itself it has got great... apart from historical, there must be many, many old bones. I mean, you've found most of them, I think, lurking under many of the buildings and strange places around the land. But it's obviously particularly, it's a great area to set a story about a forensic archaeologist, because there is obviously so much history which you've mined and researched. I mean, Ruth is at, I think I'm right in saying, but I know this, the Norfolk University. That's where she is, not to be confused with Alan Partridge's North Norfolk Digital.
Yeah.
So is that one of the reasons why you set the books in Norfolk, because it was particularly rich in antiquity?
Yes, really it was. I mean, Norfolk, also this is a way to sort of avoid, what we like to call the Midsummer Murders trap, where some beautiful part of the country is unfeasibly full of bodies. I mean, because as you said, Bob, Norfolk is full of bodies. I mean, that's true. It's been inhabited for a very long time. The earliest human footprints, or hominid footprints, were found in Haysborough, Norfolk, on the coast there, 100,000 years old. People have been in Norfolk for a very long time, so it is genuinely full of bodies. So Ruth hasn't dug them all up yet by any means. There's still many to find, but it is a very interesting. It's an interesting place in so many ways, because it's on the end of the country, although only 9,000 years ago it was still linked to Britain was obviously still linked to mainland Europe. But it's right on the end there. And so people sort of washed up at Norfolk, not washed up, but people end up in Norfolk and they stay there. And people stay there for a very long time. And even, today, people have a wonderful knowledge of, local folklore and stories. And it really is a place where people stay and they really interact fat with a lamb. So it's a very special, magical, and slightly spooky place.
Well, you talk about this, and obviously you're an expert, and your husband certainly is in archaeology, so you know of what you write. But your latest novel, I've just finished the short bit, which I absolutely loved, and I'm about to start Dark Angel. But for the first time in the series, and this is a 10-book series of the Galloway series, you take them somewhere else. They're not in Norfolk. Well, not entirely.
No, well, I've been writing about Ruth for 10 years now, 10 books in 10 years, and she's never had a holiday. Well, she has. Well, she has. To be fair, she did go to Blackpool, didn't she? She went to Blackpool in book 5. But she's never been on a foreign holiday. So part of it was thinking, maybe she needs to go on a holiday, and you've read the chalk pit, so it kind of ends at a bit of a moment where Ruth could do with a bit of a break.
Yes.
So in this book, she gets an invitation from an Italian archaeologist, in fact, someone with whom she once had a brief fling, who's called Angelo Morelli, and he invites her to go to Italy because he's found some interesting bones, and he kind of offers her a holiday as well. So she goes off there, with her little girl Kate, and shown her son Louis, and they go off to Lazio, a little town in Lazio, in Italy, to look at these bones. So I thought, it would be good to give Ruth a bit of a break. People act differently on holiday. I was quite interested in that because, of course, before long, it's not long before the familiar scowling face of Nelson is seen in Italy, accompanied by a man wearing a purple cloak. Then you get, then I have managed to find a not too far-fetched way to get Nelson and Cathbad there. So, you have just a different... people behave differently on holiday. But of course, back at home in Norfolk, there are other things happening, and there's a murderer on the loose, and that's a headache for Judy and for the other police people in Norfolk. But also, has Nelson left his family in danger? That's the question.
Well, I can't wait. I can't wait to read that. I mean, quite frankly, you had me at the word Rome. I spent a lot of time in Rome recently. I completed the Robert Harris Cicero trilogy, and I'm a big fan of Donato Carisi, which I've gone on about on this show on several times, and many of his books set in Italy. But
I haven't read him.
I recommend it. Very good, and especially if you know Rome as well as you do. I think he's a terrific read. But have you? And now this sort of thing. Most the lay people in the UK in particular will know archaeology from the standpoint of Tony and the Time Team. Have you met any of them at all?
Well, I used to have a bit of a grudge against Tony and the Time Team because I thought, until Andy started watching Time Team, he had a proper job. But, now I've got a lot to thank him for. I have met Francis Pryor a few times, and he's a wonderful person. He also writes really good crime novels.
Does he?
And at first time I met Francis, I was very worried because, he was with the archaeologist who excavated the henge, on the North Norfolk coast, and he would be the person to tell me if I'd got anything wrong in any of the detail. But he was so gracious and nice about the books. And in one of his books, there is an archaeologist called Dr. Ruth Galloway. He's put Ruth in his book, which I thought was so nice.
What a compliment.
Yeah, I thought it was a real compliment. It was like, oh, Ruth would be so proud. So I've met Francis a few times, and his books on Britain BC are just, I just devour them because he obviously knows everything about the period, but he just writes such an easy, lucid, easy to understand way. I really do recommend them.
Well, I mean, and I've got one more question now, and then before we move on to the Stevens and Mephisto line. But Ruth Galloway, forensic archaeologist, as we've discussed, and D.C. Harry Nelson are obviously your central protagonists, the copper and the expert. Now, I love the way that you've developed this bittersweet relationship over the years. And sorry to make this a sort of a book signing question, but where do they go from here? Can you say?
Well, I always thought that there would be 10 books, and that was, well, not always, I suppose. At first, I only thought there'd be one, but at about sort of book 3 or 4, I thought, well, maybe I'll write 10, which seemed a big number. But when I was writing 10, I realised that 10 wouldn't be the end, partly because I haven't quite sorted out what's going to happen between Ruth and Nelson. even in my own mind. I've got a bit of a glimmering now of what's going to happen to them. But, there's a few more big developments in The Dark Angel, and things move on, and things are never easy for them. That's all I can say. Complicated.
That's the way we like them, Elly.
Yes, complicated. There's always hope, but it's very complicated.
Now, Elly, you do have this other series we touched on a moment ago, and we spoke about the Galloway series being based in Norfolk and the links with there. Now, your other series is set in Brighton. We know the link there. That's where where you're from, where you reside, but you set it in 1950s. What was the connection there? What drew you to Brighton in the 1950s?
Well, really, what it was that my granddad, I ruthlessly exploit all my grandparents. My granddad, who was called Dennis Laws, was a comedian, a musical comedian, a variety comedian. And I wanted to write about that world. And where I'm sitting now, because you can't see, in my house, I've got my granddad's old playbills framed here. Wow. And I'm just looking at them now, and the names on them. Okay, these are a few of the names. Lou Lenny and her unrideable mule. I mean, who is that? Lavander's Feats with the Feet. Here's a good one. Ray Deeney, the gay deceiver. I mean, these people, so interesting. Who were they? So I wanted to write about this world for a long time. And Granddad was on the playbill a few times with a magician called Jasper Maskelyne, who was quite famous because in the war he was asked by Churchill to put together a group of magicians, and their job was to use kind of stage magic, sleight of hand, camouflage, those sort of things, misdirection really against the enemy. And they created things like dummy tanks and dummy soldiers, and they did sort of light shows that made the Suez Canal disappear and things. So I wanted to use that. So in my books, Max Mephisto, is a stage magician who has this backstory. In the war, he was asked to use stage magic in the war effort. And Edgar Stevens is a policeman who served with him in the war. So that's their link. And the first one, The Zigzag Girl, starts when Edgar's sent the body of a woman cut into three. It's not a gruesome book, please believe me, but it does start with a body of a woman cut into three that reminds him of that old trick, the zigzag girl, where a girl, sorry, it nearly always is a girl, is put into a cabinet and swords are put through and the middle bit's pulled out. And it reminds him of that trick, and he decides to ask Max, his old wartime sort of companion, to help him solve the murder. So it's really my fascination with that whole world, with the world of the last days of variety, really, because that's why I set it in 1950, because, of course, when television started to come in, that was the end for variety. People thought it was the end, but, of course, now it's sort of come back a bit, hasn't it?
Well, it has, but, I mean, television was the end, really, wasn't it? As they say, you could have an act, a musical act, for the last 20 years and longer, a whole lifetime. But you did it once on television and you couldn't do it again.
Yes, especially with magic. I think they all thought that would be the end because you couldn't have magic on television. Of course, now we have wonderful magicians like Dynamo who are just as sort of miraculous on television. But I don't think we ever thought that would happen. And in the third book, The Blood Card, Max takes part in that's set in 1953 during the coronation. Max takes part in a show which is kind of based on the good old days, which started in 1953. So you were starting to see that sort of nostalgia as well. So it's an interesting time, I think.
I think it's a fascinating time. I mean, I like you, have relatives that were in variety in the last century, Impressionists and Hoofers, and then my great-great-grandmother was one of... what's the great musical artist? My old man said, "Follow the van." I mean, she was a chorus girl and various other things. So our family is steeped in that side as well. But the 1950s, I mean, it conjures up all sorts of images of that time. The 40s and leading into the 50s. Sort of John Osborne's Archie Rice at the end of the pier with the nude tableaus, and I'm a great fan of one of my favourite books is J.B. Priestley's Lost Empires, which is very much about those last days of that sort of way of entertaining people. So I mean, it's a heady mix. I mean, I absolutely love it.
Angel Pavement as well is a very good book by J.B. Priestley about that.
Of course. So, I mean, I'm going to eat these books for breakfast, quite frankly, Ellie. I mean, because they are right up my cup of tea. I haven't started yet, but your latest one, Vanishing Box, has just been published to terrific reviews as usual. Can you tell us a little bit about Vanishing Box?
Oh, yeah, I'd love to. Vanishing Box is set pretty much in Brighton, in the Brighton Hippodrome. Which is a beautiful old theatre. It's one of those Frank Matcham musical theatres. Sadly, it's shut now, boarded up now, but you can go inside, and I've been inside. And, it's all still there. It was a bingo hall for a while. But the Gala Bingo did keep most of the interior. So you've still got the seats, and you've got the chandeliers, and you've got the signs. And so my book's set in, again, in the winter of 1953. Very nice, cold, snowy winter. And Max is on the bill at the Hippodrome with a tableau act. And basically in the 50s, you could have naked women on stage or near naked women on stage as long as they didn't move. Yes. And so they created these sort of weird tableau acts where these half-naked women created scenes from history or from art. And so Max is on the bill he's rather angry to be on the bill with such sort of low-class entertainment with one of these tableau acts. But then a woman's found murdered, posed in a way that seems to recreate one of these scenes. So that's how Edgar gets involved. So it's set just during a week. I've always wanted to do that. Just set a book just during so it's during 1 week run at the Brighton Hippodrome. There are these murders that seem to recreate the tableau. So I must say I had a lot of fun writing it.
Well, it sounds great. I mean, strangely enough, I was treading the boards myself at the end of last year. We spent a week at the Theatre Royal in Brighton, which is another lovely, lovely theatre. And I strolled around and I saw the exterior of the Hippodrome, and I hadn't known about it at all. And I looked up and someone said, "This is the old theatre," and it looks an extraordinary building.
It's so funny on the outside as well because you can't really tell what's inside. You must tell me next time we're at the Theatre Royal. I will come and see you and cheer. I love the Theatre Royal.
It's a lovely theatre. I've played Theatre Royal many times over the years. He says, turning into Warrington Minge, and it's coming to Brighton's always the greatest of fun anyway. But getting to play in a beautiful theatre like that is extraordinary, and they have the old playbills in the dressing rooms there.
Yes.
And there's one in particular, my birthday's on May the 4th, and there's one in particular which is a play starring Flora Robson and whatever, and it opened in Brighton on May the 4th, 1936. And I look at this whenever I go there, I go, goodness me, the day... 1959, I'm sorry, I wasn't born in 36. I feel as if I was sometimes, but I wasn't. And I look at that and I go, that sitting in this dressing room now, at 7:30 on May the 4th, 1949, and I just come into the world was
59.
59.
You're getting younger every time.
59 was
79.
79. That's more like it. Where's the Botox?
Oh, I remember being with my granddad in Brighton and meeting Flora Robson just in the street. She lived in Brighton, didn't she? And did. Granddad took off his top hat and bowed to her. And I was so embarrassed, but actually she did seem to like it. So.
Those were the days, Ellie. I haven't had anyone bow to me for years.
No, it did happen more, I think. And I do quite like it in writing about that era when people did take off their hats and raise their hats. It's such a nice gesture.
Well, that's interesting, actually, because we're writing here an historical novel, of course. You have to immerse yourself in all sorts of things. And one of them will be the social etiquettes and manners of the period. And they are, to say the least, quite different to the ones that exist today. How did you go about that?
Well, it does. I was born in the 60s, she hastily says. So I don't actually remember this, but my parents were sort of older parents. My dad was 50 when I was born, so it was very much his era, and he did speak in that sort of way, old boy, and he wore a hat and he raised it and things like that. But yes, there are so many things that are different. People wore hats. People smoked much more. Sometimes I get a bit of a dry throat from writing about how much Max smokes. They drink, that they'll go in the evening and they'll have a whiskey or a cocktail or something, which is a lovely idea, I think. But, they would do that, and maybe not bother too much if they were going to drive after. So obviously weren't so many cars about. So, they listen to the wireless.
They wore black tie to the theatre.
They did, yes. People dressed up more. And, in this last book, Vanishing Box, Emma, the detective, has to go to the theatre. And the mother makes her wear a fur coat, which Emma's a bit uncomfortable about. But, of course, people did wear those things. That's how you dressed up for the theatre.
Although nowadays, if you were walking through a major city in the UK and you took off your top hat and bowed to a stranger, you are quite likely to be stabbed, which would make a great crime novel in itself.
Well, it would, certainly would, yes.
We'll be talking to Simon Brett, hopefully, at some point in the future. He'll be telling us about his theatrical series, the Charles Paris, and maybe he's already covered that.
I love the Charles Paris books. Simon Brett's so funny. I just adore them. I love Charles Paris's terrible theatrical reviews that he gets for everything that he's been in. Wonderful.
Yes, I can relate to that very strongly.
I'm sure you can.
But it's sort of, and also it's transferred to radio hugely successfully with Bill Nye. Is there must be a television interest? I'm taking that for granted in probably both series of the books. Is that the case? Are you working with television companies to transfer it to television? And how do you feel about that?
Well, there has been a bit of interest. The TV company currently has an option on them, but I have to say it's moving quite slowly. I'm a bit torn. Of course, actually, to be honest, I'd love them to be on radio. That's what I really love. But I'm a bit torn because obviously I would like to see them on television. It would just be very interesting to see the book sort of take life on television. And, of course, it would be more people would buy the book, so that would be great. But on the other hand, I'm a big fan of the Archers, and a friend gave me an Archers calendar a couple of years ago for Christmas. And I just wish she hadn't, I'm sorry to say, because it was horrific seeing those people in real life. Because the pictures are better in your head. So sometimes I do think, if they're on television, I think everyone has their vision of Ruth, and they have the vision of Nelson, they have the vision of North Norfolk coast there, or Norfolk generally. And on television, it will be both exciting, but also a little bit frightening, I don't know, to see it happen. But, on balance, of course, I would love to see it happen.
Well, it's true. I mean, this comes up a lot, that of course, the characters that people have in their minds as readers, that's one of the wonderful things about reading, is that you have this ability to create in your own mind, take what the author has given and create in your own mind exactly how someone looks and how exactly, obviously, they behave. And casting main roles of detectives has always been a very difficult area. I mean, the stories of David Jason and Frost, and originally, John Thor with Colin Dexter and whatever. There's a long history of people saying, well, this isn't how I imagined it, or whatever. But in saying that, do you imagine a Ruth Galloway in your head if it came to that?
Well, it would be idle to say I hadn't thought about it. Because I have thought about it. I've always thought that Ruth Jones would be a good Ruth.
Oh, how fantastic. Yes.
She's got very much the right look for Ruth. She's such an intelligent actress. I think she'd do it really well. So she would kind of be my ideal Ruth.
Do you know her at all?
I don't know.
Well,
I wish I did.
Books at the beach. She's done books at the beach in a couple of weeks' time, I think. I'll mention it.
Oh, do please.
She's a great actress, and she's a wonderful comedian as well.
And don't forget to claim your 15%, Bob.
Yes, absolutely. A part of your choice in the play. Yes. Yes, I'd love that. She would be. I don't know her, sadly. I'm always trying to think of ways of getting to know her and to persuade her to be Ruth. Nelson's a bit more difficult. I don't know. I've always seen him as looking a bit like a young Ted Hughes, and the actor who looks very much like that is Richard Armitage. So in my head, it's a bit sort of Richard Armitage-y. But I know other people don't agree.
Well, and this is not a problem you'd have on radio, of course.
No,
because that is much closer and much more akin to the act of reading, as much as the listener's imagination is engaged in a pretty similar way to a reader. But I mean, I have to say, Ruth Jones is absolutely brilliant casting, because she's not dissimilar to the Ruth I've got in my mind as well. No. So I mean, there we go. Well, I'll tell you what, Ellie, my companion here has just researched. He's got some information about this Sunday.
Yes, the Sunday of the Rose you're talking about is this Sunday, the 11th, or last Sunday, as the listeners will be will be hearing it as. So.
I see. Oh, yes. We play with time on this podcast.
We do, yeah.
But,
the 11th of... Thank you so much for finding out. It's Mother's Day as well, of course, this year, isn't it?
It's going to be a biggie in your household.
Oh, I hope so, yeah. Yes.
Elly, it's just been a joy talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us and being such a terrific guest.
I've enjoyed it so much. Thank you very much for asking me.
Well, another delightful guest. We're very lucky with the people we've had on, aren't we?
Yes, hugely so. And as I said, Elly is someone I would hope we get on the show at some point. And my goodness me, she didn't disappoint. What a fascinating lady with great insights into crime writing and a great writer. So, as I said in the interview. Please buy her books, download her books.
I have. I've got one here in front of me. I've got the Crossing Places, which is the...
Oh, that's the first one.
The first Dr. Ruth Galloway mystery, as you can, just for the listeners.
Yes, start. You don't have to start at the beginning. Many of them are... What did you just do?
I just ruffled the book into the microphone.
Do it again. That's vaguely exciting. Yes, that's very good. That's up there with your pointless segues.
Just testing your base, listeners. And they're all available on Kobo as well, I believe. So why not give them a go? The first book in the series is The Crossing Places, which I'm just about to start reading myself. And as a listener to Partners in Crime, you can get 90% off of Elly's books, your first book purchase at Kobo. You don't need an e-reader or a special device. You can get 90% off by going to kobo.com, selecting the book you'd like to buy and entering the promo code CRIME at the checkout, and maybe suggest that your first purchase is The Crossing Places by Elly Griffiths. Why not?
You won't be disappointed.
A good place to start. Now, if you have any suggestions for future guests on the show, please do contact us to suggest somebody. It's all about you. It's all about the list. Well, it's not. It's about us. But we have to pretend it's about you. So if you have any suggestions for future guests or topics you'd like us to cover on the show, please do contact us. You can email hello@partnersincrime.online. You can get us on Twitter @CrimeFicPodcast. We're on Facebook as well under Partners in Crime Podcast, and our website is partnersincrime.online. And don't forget to subscribe as well to make sure you get the latest episode sent directly to your device. Now, next week's episode.
Yes.
We have a very, very special top secret guest who we're not going to name today, which is absolutely, positively not because we haven't booked anyone in yet, is it, Bob?
No.
With any luck, hopefully, we might see you next week. Bye-bye.
Partners in Crime was presented by Adam Croft and Robert Dawes and produced by Adam Croft. The theme tune was by the Caesareans. The Partners in Crime logo and imagery were designed by Stuart Bache. Partners in Crime is sponsored by Kobo, your favourite local bookshop, perfected.